Hello everyone, welcome to the Whiteboard. Today I want to talk about what media has labeled data breaches, but are actually three situations of public web scraping, but are dangerous nonetheless. I've talked about one of them, the LinkedIn piece that recently came out here in April of 2021, but I want to talk about two others that came out pretty much in the same week because they illustrate the point well. But before I do so, I want to talk about web scraping for a second. Here so you have something to focus on. Web scraping. What is web scraping? For the unenlightened, web scraping is where I access public information via API or by script, where I automate a script to pull this public information down, like LinkedIn profiles, for example. And then I pull thousands or 10,000s or millions in some cases of these profiles down, collect them in an organized fashion in a database, and then, of course, utilize it for some means. In this case, the individual is selling them on a forum that otherwise sells and transacts in things that we would consider criminal data. Stolen data, data that was collected and analyzed and put together for pretty much cyber actors that we consider criminals in just about every sense that you could. And so even though it's captured and collected via web scraping in a benign fashion, its usage and who the audience is not. They are criminal in nature. So with that in mind, keep this in mind as far as web scraping, because you're going to hear me say that they're using tools that aren't inaccessible to anybody else, and they're utilizing information that is otherwise public, information that you have made visible to folks with the idea that you would act on LinkedIn to connect with people and socialize, or on Facebook, find friends and otherwise socialize, and so on. I just mentioned two of the three, but let's talk about them because there are millions of records on basically every one of these. So the first one, since we've already named it, is LinkedIn. That's an L. The second one is Facebook, and no, I don't mean an old breach. I'm talking about one that just happened this week in April. And of course, the last one is an audio kind of program that's also kind of used for socializing called Clubhouse. Now, on the surface, besides the fact that these are three social networks, there's not a lot of connections between them, right? Outside of that kind of obvious facts. But for you, it's important to understand that even though publicly visible information was gathered, it's still incredibly dangerous. And it's incredibly dangerous for a couple of very, very specific reasons. One, this allows someone to analyze and figure out things about you socially. Who you connect to, who your friends are, who your relatives are, how you're connected, whether it's a first degree or a seventh degree kind of connection. And in fact, on Facebook, what was abused to do this was find your friends. If you remember that particular tool, used to find friends you haven't connected with in for a while, or just friends that you want to connect with, was abused to find connections between you and other people, and that was collected in this data set. On LinkedIn, it was primarily first-degree connections, but it went farther in some cases, depending on what was accessible on your profile. Like many people use LinkedIn in order to look for jobs, and therefore they make their profile very visible because we use it not only to network and to kind of talk at some points, but primarily we use it as a second resume or a curriculum vitae, a CV, so that people can find things out about us quite readily and double-check things. Clubhouse is, like I said, an audio-only kind of social network, but it allowed you to pull connections and things that you like. When people craft passwords, for example, or answer questions to things about their identity, they often pull from their personal life, people they know, things they like, songs they love, those kind of things, to source that material. Which, if you know that information and you know how people are connected, makes it very easy for you to get phished. For someone to steal your identity, or just pretend and do things on the social engineering side to try to get access to things that you have. Information you have, accounts you have access to, things you do for work, things you do for home. It doesn't really matter. They all have value to a criminal who can utilize them for one purpose or another. And as a side note, it's not just criminals. That's why we struggle so much with advertising on a regular basis, regardless of who does it. or we struggle with the amount of information we have to provide because companies utilize it to target advertising, to focus on you, personalize, they call it, to you, but in many ways that personalization invades your privacy heavily. Now in this case, staying on topic with this criminal activity, the focus here is to inject this information into the darknet corpus, which is a fancy way to say all the material that's available to criminals, ostensibly through the Tor, the Onion Router network, and other darknets like it from ZeroNet on down. So this kind of data, purchasable for very small amounts of money, allows an analyst on the criminal side to triangulate and create connections and make it very easy to do one of these three things. Be it phish you, social engineer you, or just perform identity theft. And if you wonder how this enters the equation, just think about the fact that Facebook and LinkedIn and other ones collect your phone number, your date of birth, sometimes your full name, including middle name, and other elements that are common parts of identity fragments that go into answering questions that sites will interrogate you about to make sure you are you. And so that becomes part of this piece. So this diagramming of your social connections feeds into social engineering and feeds into identity theft and so on, because especially social engineering, because you're more likely to respond to someone that you think is a friend or is close to you or is a relative than you are to a stranger. If I know the phone number and name of someone that is close to you that I have figured out because of Facebook and LinkedIn, and I use that understanding in order to phish you or to social engineer something that you have from you, I can succeed more readily if I approach you as if I'm someone you already know, someone you expect to receive a call or an email or a text from, and so on. Social engineering becomes very simple in that particular situation, and it can be sourced by this. Just like you can derive passwords and other elements that you want to keep secret and keep protected through this kind of information. Now, I'm going to close because I wanted to make this short and just bring this up. And I may talk about each one of these more individually. But for now, the thing you need to consider is no matter how mad you might be at either one of these three, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Clubhouse, or any other one that has lost parts of your identity, there's always this struggle and question that I hear people have of who's responsible. They should have is often the beginning of many statements I hear, and I'm generalizing on purpose. But you need to think personally, who is responsible for your information? At the end of the day, you take the hit if you do not protect your information. If Facebook loses things that you put out there in a public space, yes, bad on them, and yes, there might be litigation, yes, there might be legal action that can be taken against them to prevent that in the future, but they don't suffer the consequences personally. You do. You take the hit because someone steals your identity or does a social engineering attack or phishes you, not them. So keep that in mind. It's a wonderful thing to share and connect and be part of social networks. Just be cautious what you give them as far as information. Things that you absolutely need to provide, be clear and provide those. If you can retract them after you do so, do that. For example, many times you need to provide a valid phone number in order to verify your identity. But equally often, you can remove that phone number and put one that is not necessarily your personal phone number in its place, your work phone or a generic phone, so that it's still a valid phone number, yet it's not yours. And if someone did gain access to it, they would not get the legitimate number that could help them spoof your SMS message to someone else, for example. Same thing for many other elements. You should consider how much you share. And I know that's not cool or fun or whatever the more wonderful word is these days, but it's important to think about your security in the context of your identity and you, because you only get one. And if you lose enough of it, you lose it all. And at the point where, you know, how should I say this? Put it in context. It's annoying to lose an account. It's annoying if someone takes over your LinkedIn account. It's annoying if somebody pretends to be you on Facebook. But it's beyond annoying when someone steals your identity and they take out a bunch of loans in your name. It's beyond annoying when someone files your taxes for you and then back files in the last 3 years, takes that money and runs off, and you know who's responsible? You. not them. So consider these things, even if only for a second, and take the standard steps that can help make this a safer thing for you. There's no safety after a certain amount of information is leaked. That's just fact. But what you can do is take proper steps. Understand what is lost. Make sure in the future that you do not allow that information to float. So be careful what you put out there publicly. Your birth dates, all the other things that are fragments of your identity that are very critical from your name, your full name, your birth date, your phone numbers, that kind of stuff. All those things that you use for second and third factors. And then be cautious and proper. If you don't have a password manager, get one. Get one that you can create passwords from instead of using things that are part of your identity that someone could determine through analysis by looking at your social connections and who you know and what songs you like, just as a straightforward case example. Turn on two-factor or multi-factor authentication for sites that allow it. Every one of these does. And it could have been a preventative step. Now, in this case, this is public information. It's things that you elected to allow to be public. Something to keep in mind. It's not like they broke in and stole things that you had concealed and said, I want to keep secret. No, this is things that were publicly available. It does not make it better. It just means that you should be cognizant of what those things are and keep that in mind. Now, I'll step down off my soapbox and just say that these will not necessarily stop. However, there is a limit to how much impact it can have. As this enters into the darknet corpus, which again is a fancy way to say the amount of information the criminal element of the underworld knows about you and can capitalize on, they get to a saturation point where it cannot be used, too much information, and then it decays over time. Usually about a year, information begins to fade in value. Secondly, the more information out there, the lesser its value, which means it becomes cheap and it's harder to sell. Some people quit selling because of that. So there are some possible rainbows in this particular stormy cloud, but more likely than not, this will be used in ways against people, and especially if this leads to more and more break-ins. What this primarily helps feed is ransomware, which was not one of my four, but it's one of the deadlier ones of things that can happen as a byproduct for this, because knowing credentials and knowing enough information about someone does open that door as something to consider. So thank you for your time. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you do like this, please press like. If you like what you hear and other things on the channel, please subscribe to our channel and hear more whiteboard discussions and lectures as we move forward. Thank you.